welcome Will Hodgman, the former High Commissioner of Australia to Singapore. Have I got that correct? Is that
That's
the right
it.
pronunciation
Yep.
of it? We're going to have a quick chat about Singapore and Australia and the tech industry, and no better person to have on the pod with us today. So welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks very much.
And good to see you again. I
Yeah.
think last time we had a conversation, we were early days NCS talking about how we could build a strong partnership between Australia and Singapore. And there's so many things that we do that a lot of people don't know between the two governments. So maybe start with a bit of an overview of how Singapore and Australia play together in the tech space from your past experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't think of a stronger partnership between two nations than Australia and Singapore. And it goes back many decades, many generations. And that continues for our nations, particularly during and post-COVID, which had such a dramatic impact on the world, but also on keeping those connections relevant, important, vibrant. And I think as a testament to the strength of that relationship in that time when I was here, we struck and executed a digital economy agreement, a green economy agreement, both of which have at their heart technology, adoption of AI, emerging technologies to further strengthen connections, which, as I say, are well established, but both countries want to keep them relevant to support our shared objectives.
It's interesting because I think back to when we were Melbourne IT or the ARC Group, right? And we sourced where we wanted to go with our business, and we looked at culture, and we were slightly envious of the Singapore tech market, to be honest with you, a country which is so much smaller than Australia and has achieved a lot, right? And we were really excited by an opportunity. And I think you would have seen it in your time, like how much comes out of Singapore that in this small space that we could leverage back in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. They're not only highly effective and efficient producers and suppliers of product and services, but for Australia, they're amongst our most trusted partners. We've got the highest level defence and security arrangements with Singapore. We've got enormously important cultural connections, student to student, people to people links that go right way back. Military and defence have really important bonds. So there's already established trust. And I think Australia and Australians are trusting of Singapore to deliver the highest quality. So I think there's an enormous opportunity for businesses here in Singapore to support Australia's effort, and for government, especially where I spent close to 2 decades in Australia. I think service delivery, providing that effectively, efficiently, using the benefits of emerging technologies, AI and so on, is an amazing prospect.
And do you think there's any key differences between Australia and Singapore that we could learn in Australia or Singapore can learn from Australia, or vice versa, like in the tech space particularly, that would be beneficial?
Yeah, and look, I'm no tech expert, but when it comes to how governments operate, and obviously it's a very different system. In many ways, if I could transplant what they do here in Singapore into Australia, things would get done a lot quicker. They're no less risk averse or cautious to the threat, the risk of emerging technologies, cybersecurity, breakdown in systems, etc., which is very disarming for governments. But they're more able to quickly adopt and to implement good policy, engage proficient technologists to deliver, and I think Australian governments could learn a lot from that.
I think I heard you earlier today on a panel talk about some of the key things of Australian government around technology, and one of them, and I was speaking to someone in the Singapore government, was around high availability. So we would expect our government systems to be up a lot of the time, and this one person was talking about they've got a leeway of 5 minutes per year for the system on their key systems to be down, right? And they're not afraid to build it here, right? No one's afraid to put their hand up and say, we'll build it and we'll make that happen. And I find in Australia, I think that's something we could definitely learn as well. I think we've had some historical issues in technology into government because of the size of our country. And I think, and that creates maybe a bit of fear or risk adversity.
Yeah.
And I think we could learn that from here. I mean, I see that here, that they just get things done, right?
Yeah, I think we need in Australia to have a more open conversation about what this looks like, the benefits it can deliver, accept there's a risk attached, but have resilience and strategies in place to mitigate that. And I think that would help in the public narrative to bring the citizens of Australia, the public along, punters who look very closely and carefully at what governments at all levels are doing. But, we need to accept that with opportunity comes risk. And there's a safe middle ground for us to be in.
Yeah. It's funny. I think that's also a good recipe for startups as well, right? When they start. And Singapore has one of the largest amounts per capita, at least, of startups in the world. I always get a bit envious when I look at Singapore and I look at Australia and think, why don't we do more together? Have you seen a lot of Australian startups coming over here to start up in the past, or are there good collaborations?
Yeah, there have been, and we're making it easier now. The Digital Economy Agreement, the Green Economy Agreement that I spoke about have programs embedded within those multinational or multi-layered bilateral agreements between our countries, and that comes with funding, which is great. So we see Australian government, CSIRO, notably working with counterparts here to operationalise what is an important agreement between countries, but shouldn't be left to government to execute. So what I hope and what's expected by both our governments, and when I was here, our prime ministers at the highest level said we need government to engage the private sector to operationalise this and to make it meaningful, deliver real positive outcomes, improve service delivery, create greater efficiencies. So that's what we've got to deliver.
Yeah, it's funny. I've seen a lot of the Australian people. It's 15. What do we got? 1,500 people at this conference today. Customers and partners, not our own staff. On top of that is pretty big. And everyone comes through and they say, who haven't been from Singapore, said, we can't believe how big this is in Singapore. This is an American-style tech conference. Like, what are your impressions of this? Seeing this, having lived in Singapore, and then coming back from Australia to see a conference like this.
Yeah, it astounded me when I was here, and I came to quite a few of these sorts of events. The scale, the magnitude, the commitment, investment that Singapore gives to holding events like this, which they do so well, but also to engaging, leveraging from the relationships that they build. I think it's a fantastic demonstration of commitment.
Yeah.
And to see this event and its scale, and to learn that there's a waiting list or it's oversubscribed is fantastic. And I think it's the sort of thing that in Australia we could do more of, because it raises awareness in the broader ecosystem, not just government, but within industry, to collaborate, to build partnerships. And so I'm a firm believer in these sorts of events in person, in a place like Singapore. They do it well.
Yeah. And the commercial sector, we talked a bit about the government sector. Commercial sector, have you seen a lot of good partnerships between Singapore and Australia? And I think one of the things that I first learned in commercial partnerships was people love Singapore because it's an English-speaking.
Yeah.
It's where the East meets the West to some extent, and it's a really easy opportunity for us to, get into our neighbours' economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Financial, legal systems, very closely connected, high levels of trust. Singaporeans, are very direct in their expectations and what they want to achieve as an Australian. So it's a neat and very comfortable fit. But it's often the key, I think, is in finding and making the matches, the partnerships, and government plays a role in that, but can only take you so far. So events like this, I think, are super important. And already in the time I've been here, I've heard of businesses meeting with potential collaborators and partners as well. So I think it's a great melting pot of opportunity for not only the government sector, as you say, but also for industry, for business, startups as well. I mean, it's a nice, safe landing space in Singapore, not only for this important market, but for broader Southeast Asia as well. So
we also love it from the partners, the tech partners at this conference, and being able to kind of leverage an Asia Pacific partnership, which is much bigger than Australia, obviously, but from here as as a central hub to some extent. I think pre-COVID we would have thought that would have been like a Hong Kong or somewhere else, but now it's
Yeah.
definitely embedded right here in Singapore.
Yeah, and they acknowledge they own that.
Yeah,
They invest in it. They support great events. They want to be the hub for Greater Southeast Asia, but they know, like we do, unless we work to build capability, resilience, infrastructure in Southeast Asia, our economic prosperity, our social outcomes, our regional security can only go so far. So for Singapore, they've got an interest also in the Green Economy Agreement, the Digital Economy Agreement I spoke about. They're bilaterals between Australia and Singapore, but the vision of both of them is to build it into a broader Southeast Asian network. So for business, the opportunities are astounding for our nations, and for global security and prosperity, it's enormous.
Now, would you have ever thought you were coming on a tech podcast as the former High Commissioner of Australia to talk technology at a tech conference?
Yeah, I look, I've acknowledged that I'm no tech expert. I'm a lawyer by trade, former politician and diplomat. So I'm comfortable in those areas, but I'm fascinated by tech, always have been, and to see, the rapid growth, to watch it evolve. I think over COVID and beyond as well, the speed in which it happened, and I've often thought that COVID necessitated such a dramatic shift. We had no option but to move so much of what we do, online and to digital platforms. And these things I spoke about that I did, a year of them were during terrible lockdowns in Australia and Singapore, but they still happen.
And they did it really well. I got the end of COVID over here, right at the end I came over, but seeing how the education system stood up, the government systems, just everything over here. It's a small place, but just even little things like keeping people mentally well and stuff like that. What they did at the staycation, you got a voucher to go stay at the hotel, so the hotels were supported, but then you also got to get out of your accommodation and stuff. I thought that was all pretty impressive. Yeah.
And without labouring the point, the two agreements I've spoken to, first of their kind in the world, no other nations have these. Now, there's a lot clamouring to get the same thing. Australia and Singapore, the first countries to exchange COVID vaccines. Singapore was the first country to open a travel lane to Australia.
Yep.
We were exporting Australian produce back into Singapore on planes that took Aussies who had been, for a while shut out of Australia back in. That's at a very high level, but it demonstrates to me, that adversity brings opportunity, and it can be done. So I'm just hoping that that sort of momentum continues now post-COVID, and can support growth for business, industry, collaboration between our research and development institutions, academia, universities. It was a real, silver lining to what was a really tough, difficult time, particularly for people who were stuck overseas. I was one of them, but there were a lot of people a lot worse off who couldn't get home. So we've got to now, turn it around, which is happening.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. I think we could learn a lot, and as I said, there's a lot we do here from an NCS perspective in government and enterprise that we can definitely learn back into Australia and vice versa. And I think having those relationships and agreements in place make it give us a framework to do that within. So, look, great to have you to chat today. It's a
pleasure.
It's been good, and look forward to keep working with you and talking with you in the future.
Absolutely. Keep up the great work. The last thing I'd say, and I noticed a similarity between Australians and Singaporeans, we both tend to be relatively modest about what we're doing. There can be a tall poppy thing in Australia, but more often too, we don't tell our story as strongly, as loudly and proudly as other people do. Australia-Singapore thing is really important, and it's an enormous advantage to our nations. But the business growth in organisations such as yours is something that we should continue to raise awareness about, talk about, be very proudly promoting, because I think it's a great Australia-Singapore success story. So well done to you.
Definitely is.
And your team.
12,000 people, most people in Australia would not really have seen that. So it's thank you, appreciate that, and we'll tell our story. So
good.
It's good. Thank you.
All the best.